Hello everyone. You might be able to tell I'm a little under the weather on this particular recording, but the show must go on. We will continue, and you are all very welcome to the Tales of a Time Lord. Hello everyone. In this video, this is a very early stage in the beginner's guide to classic series Doctor Who, and I'm going to be introducing you to my top 10 shortest stories of classic Doctor Who. Not so much to follow the plot or anything like that, but just to get used to the format changes of classic series Doctor Who. These stories are 1 to 3 parts and will roughly take around an hour to watch, just to get you into the formatting changes of classic series Doctor Who before you actually start to follow any storylines or episodes. So here are my top 10 shortest stories to begin with. Number 1. On an Earthly Child. This is both the very first story of classic series Doctor Who, but also the story that I would recommend beginning with. This is a 4-part story, however, I'm not going to recommend you watch the entire thing, because it is essentially broken up into 2 parts. The first part and the first 10 minutes of the second part is basically the introduction to the show, the main characters, and it involves Ian and Barbara finding out about a schoolchild called Susan who appears to have knowledge far beyond 1963 London. They then end up going into the TARDIS, meeting her grandfather called the Doctor, and then get taken to caveman times. This is the part where I would recommend you stop watching for particularly early viewers. I think that the caveman story is a wonderful beginning to the show. I'm very gripping myself, although I have been watching classic series Doctor Who for quite a number of years now. For a very beginner, I would recommend just watching the first story. You can watch An Unearthly Child on the link down below on my Timetale version of it, which I've separated into this very moment so that when they enter the TARDIS and when they leave into the caveman times, my edit stops. You cannot watch this on iPlayer, I'm afraid, because of a copyright dispute between the owner of the material and the BBC. However, if you did want to watch the entire story, you could buy it. It is available on DVD as part of the Beginning box set, which includes the first 3 stories of classic series Doctor Who. As I say, I don't think it's a good one to follow as a first-time viewer, but it is a good one to start with. And if you just watch the first episode and half the second episode, which is where I recommend you cut off, that will only take around half an hour, if that, so it's an easy way to begin. And I think most classic series viewers and many New Who viewers would argue that this is one of the very best of the show in general, so you should find it an enjoyable half an hour. Suggestion number 2, The Edge of Destruction. This is the 3rd story of classic series Doctor Who. It breaks off between the Daleks, which is a 6-parter, and Marco Polo, which is a 7-parter. This is sort of a little bit of a reset where we have a single set, the TARDIS itself, and the main 4 characters. The story itself is only 2 parts long, so you're looking at round about 45 minutes combined. And it is sort of a story similar to, I would suggest, Midnight in New Who, Doctor Who Series 4. This is essentially where all 4 characters are having a battle of wits as the ship breaks down and nobody can understand why. This sets off lots of paranoia, fear, character development, and even threats of violence to kill each other. As a child, when I first started watching classic series Doctor Who, this was the story that I watched most often, perhaps due to its length, but also because there is very, very little storyline. It is simply 4 actors bouncing off against each other for 2 episodes, roughly 45 minutes. If you're interested in the DVD, again it is part of the Beginning box set, which I would recommend buying. It's simply 3 stories in a box, the first 3 stories of classic series. Also, you can watch this one on the iPlayer if you wish to do so. It is just after the Daleks on the iPlayer, so it is the 3rd story of classic series Doctor Who, and this is the one that I would strongly aim you towards. My 3rd recommendation is The Rescue. This is the 3rd story of Season 2, and it is only 2 parts long. It is the introduction of new companion Vicky. If you want to compare it to something in modern Doctor Who, I would say something like Smith and Jones introducing Martha. This is the first companion introduction to the 2nd companion of the classic series. It involves the Doctor, Ian and Barbara having just left Susan, and they arrive on the planet Dido. There they meet Vicky and I won't spoil the storyline for you, but there is strong twists, strong character moments, a few scares in there, a few moments of comedy, and again it is only 2 parts long, so like the previous suggestion, you can do it in 45 minutes. And I think to a first-time viewer this is a very, very strong opening. It is writing that I would think is perhaps stronger than you might suggest for the 60s. It wouldn't be out of place in New Who at all, and there are strong mysteries, plot twists, all sorts of things going on there. And Kerquillian and the other characters in there are very, very scary. So, yeah, highly recommend The Rescue. My 4th suggestion is Planet of Giants. Now, all my recommendations have been the first Doctor so far. That is purely coincidental. I'm not suggesting you watch these in order, but because the classic series did tend to verge into 4 and 6-parters, Hartnell is the one that is mostly containing the 2 or 3-parters, so this is why I suggest this area. Planet of Giants is a 3-part story where, and I hope this isn't spoiling it for you, but they get miniaturized. The story goes that they arrive in a garden, and there are sort of 2 stories going on at once. One figuring out how to live in a world where you're tiny and everything is a threat to you, but there is also a second subplot going on which sort of explains why being miniaturized is important to the storyline. It was originally a 4-parter when it was written, but due to whatever production issues were going on at the time, which I won't bore you with right now, it ended up getting cut down from 4 parts to 3 parts. So essentially, the 3rd part just jumps to the end of part 4, and I don't think you really notice this very much. So it is effectively and was broadcast as a 3-part story. So you could do it in around an hour, 10 minutes. And I think that there's a lot of comedy, a lot of sci-fi hijinks, and some strong political storylines going on there that I think you'll find very interesting. My next recommendation is Black Orchid. This is a 1980s episode with Peter Davison as the Doctor. This is sort of a murder mystery storyline. It's a little bit of comedy. It's a little bit away from the threat and sci-fi and all that sort of thing. It's just the Doctor and his companions having a bit of a laugh in history, and a murder mystery ensues. At this point in the show, I believe I'm right in saying that they used to broadcast the show twice weekly, and this is one of the few stories beyond the 60s where there are actually 2 parts. It is the shortest story of the 1980s. So if you want for just a little bit of fun, a bit of historical hijinks and a bit of a mystery, I wouldn't say it's potentially the best storyline if you want to follow anything, but just getting your feet dipped into the water, it's a strong place to go. So Black Orchid. My next recommendation is perhaps somewhat an unorthodox route, but I'm going to go with Survival. This is the final ever classic series Doctor Who story. It features the 7th Doctor, Sylvester McCoy, Ace, played by Sophie Aldred, and I hope this is not giving away the twist too much, but the Master is involved in this. In the 1980s, they did tend to broadcast stories as a 4-parter followed by a 3-parter. One would be mostly in a set or inside the studios, and one would be mostly on location. This particular story, the final story of classic series, landed on the 3-parter, mostly filmed in location. And it features Ace going back to her home of Perivale to discover that something is not all right with the cats. This is sort of a political storyline. It is based a lot on Thatcher's Britain, about youths not knowing where their future lies, and there are a lot of political tones towards Thatcher's Britain at this time. I would say in New Who it's something similar to perhaps Rose or Aliens of London. It's that gritty, earthy council estate vibe, and it has the Master and some perhaps slightly funny cats. I wouldn't worry too much about the lore. You don't need to know who the Master is at this point. You don't need to know who Ace is at this point. And you don't even need to know it's a finale, because at the time of recording, they didn't know this was the final story. The time of airing they did, but not when they recorded it. So it's not bogged down with any parting of the ways, doomsday finale sort of vibes. It is simply one of the best classic series Doctor Who stories that just happened to be the last one that was made. So it is 3 parts, which is roughly 60-70 minutes. And I think, yeah, this is the closest in timescale towards New Who. This is the final classic series story, so if you're wanting something with New Who vibes, this is the place to go. My next recommendation is Mission to the Unknown. This is a slightly complicated one to build up to, but I think as a first-time viewer, when you don't really need to know the subtext of things, this one could be okay. It is the only classic series story, to my knowledge, that is one single part. Essentially, there was, in the 1960s, in season 3 perhaps, there was the story The Daleks' Master Plan, which is now lost, all but 3 parts. It was a 12-part epic, where lots of companions and characters come and go. It is a 12-part storyline, sort of similar to The Flux. But they did release a prequel story to this, one single part, called Mission to the Unknown. This is the very first Dr. Light story, so think of things like Turn Left, Love and Monsters, where the Doctor does not take part in the storyline, but it's sort of building up to the point before the Doctor arrives on the planet. This, however, was erased due to long and complicated circumstances, which I won't bore you with now, but some of the 60s storyline was erased, including the sequel to this, The Daleks' Master Plan. That said, however, a bunch of university students were able to recreate it, using fairly good sets, models and actors similar to those in the original story. They also got in touch with the BBC and the original cast, who recommended their version and uploaded it to the official Doctor Who YouTube channel, which means that this is now available as a recreation in colour and with modern actors. However, it is sad to say that it doesn't actually exist in its original format, but if you were willing to go along with that, and be aware that this is the script of the original, but not the original that was broadcast in the 60s, then I would go with Mission to the Unknown. It is only 25 minutes long, and you can get it on this YouTube link. Next up is Delta and the Bannermen. This is another classic series story in the 80s that was 3 parts with Sylvester McCoy and this time Mel Bush, who New Who viewers might know from being in Ncuti Gatwa's era. This is Mel Bush's original era. This is more of a comedic storyline. It has celebrity cameos from comedians. It is a story which features babies in bubble wrap and face painted green. It's not at all a serious story, but it is very interesting and very entertaining, I feel. There are lots of subplots with comedic duos. There are motorbike chases, lots of action in there. And there are some emotional and sci-fi leanings in there, so it's plenty to get your teeth into. If you're not into the campier vibes of New Who, you might struggle here. This is very much where the campy side of classic series leaned into New Who in later days. So if you're not into Slitheen, Absorb-Aloft, Space Babies, you might struggle here. But this is just Doctor Who having fun, having a laugh, a bit of action, a bit of chase in there, and some babies painted green. So Delta and the Bannermen is my next recommendation. Second to last choice for me is Dragonfire. This is the final story of season 22. This is Sylvester McCoy again, and this is more again of a comedic romp. This story features companion Ace as well as companion Mel. This is where Mel leaves and Ace begins. So there is a little bit of a potentially school reunion vibe. If you don't know who Mel was in the Ncuti Gatwa era, or didn't know who Ace was in Power of the Doctor, this is an introduction to the pair of them. This also does feature a returning character in Savlon Glitz, which appeared in the previous season, but you don't need to know who he is for this story to work. We learn a lot about Ace in this one, so there's a lot of character development that you might get your teeth stuck into. She's a pyrotechnic teenager who, for reasons unknown to us at this point, has arrived in Iceworld due to some timey-wimey hijinks. And yeah, she's a rebellious teenager with a hobby of building explosives. There are some comedic leanings in this. There's a lot of slapstick from Sylvester McCoy's Doctor and from Savlon Glitz together as a double act. I think as a 3-parter, again, a little bit of fun, not quite as silly as Delta and the Bannermen. There is a bit more of a storyline going on here. And I think if you're into the previous stories of Survival and Delta and the Bannermen, this is a decent place for you to continue, and it's 3 parts, so you can do it in roughly 70 minutes. And to my final recommendation is Doctor Who and the Daleks. This is the Peter Cushing 2 movies. I know this is going to be controversial with classic series viewers, and I just don't care, but this is a big screen adaptation of the second ever story, Doctor Who the Daleks, and the Season 2, Episode 2 story, The Dalek Invasion of Earth. When Dalek Mania was going on in the 60s, in other words, everything that was Dalek was just going mental in terms of promotion and marketing and people buying into it, the creator of this film basically took the original script of Doctor Who and the Daleks, which was 7 parts long, so we're talking a good 2 hours, over 2 hours, and they turned it into a short film. The characters and storyline are moderately the same. The Doctor is no longer an alien called the Doctor, he is now a human inventor called Doctor Who. But ostensibly the storyline and the characters are exactly the same, it's just not in the Doctor Who universe, not in the canon. But if you wanted to get into the Doctor and the Daleks in the 60s, which are 6 and 7 parts long, you're talking a decent afternoon to watch both of those. This is essentially the same storyline, squashed down into a movie format with added comedy, and it is in colour, as the marketing made a big point to point out. If you're wishing to watch these, you can buy them on DVD in various formats. There was a fairly recent remastering of them as well, if you wanted high quality. But they are also, to be fair, just on telly. If you watch film channels, you will basically most weekends find somewhere broadcasting Doctor Who and the Daleks. They're on telly regularly. But again, this is not a canon storyline, so don't get your hopes up about this being to do with the Doctor Who story. This is essentially a remake, a buying off the success of Doctor Who, and the characters are not too far distorted, so if you're not sure what Doctor Who storyline's about, if you don't know what the Daleks are about, then this is a fairly decent place. If it just happens to be on telly one afternoon, watch it. And that is my list. These are the shortest stories that Classic Series 2 does. If you can get into any of these storylines, if you want to buy them or watch them on do whatever, then this will just give you a taste of the formatting of Classic Series Doctor Who before you can decide where you want to start actually following storylines and getting into them. If you wish to recommend me any more short stories that I might want to do in a future video, you can comment them down below. Contact me on my social media for stories that you'd like to recommend me discuss. Or if you have anything to discuss about this video in general, send it to my social media, links are there, and I will see you next time.